In this video, I'm going to show you how to knit a blanket design that I am naming Lucas. Lucas is a 24 row repeat, so slightly on the longer side of the blankets that I knit, but the 24 row repeat is nice and rhythmic, so it's really easy to get to grips with. One thing I know a lot of you will like about this blanket is the fact that it is reversible. So although it doesn't look identical on the back, it looks almost identical. The only difference is that there are 3 garter ridges on one side and 2 on what I have classed as the right side. But aside from that, this blanket design is completely reversible. To knit a blanket the same size as mine, and that is 60 centimeters wide by 80 centimeters long, you're going to need about 400 grams or between 1,000 and 1,200 meters of double knit yarn. For those of you outside the UK, that is light worsted weight or 3-weight yarn, but if you can't find that, you can use any yarn you like. You just need to use the right size knitting needles for the yarn that you pick. You are also going to need some 4mm circular knitting needles. You want them to be at least 100 centimeters long, because anything shorter than that and you won't be able to accommodate all the stitches that you need to cast on. Then I would always recommend having some embroidery scissors and tapestry needles so that you can sort out your yarn when you change from one ball to the next. And then 2 stitch markers, and these we use to mark out where our side border ends and our middle textured panel starts. And it just makes knitting so much simpler because you don't have to worry about where your borders start and finish, and then you can concentrate on that middle textured panel. I like to separate out the pattern multiple for the middle textured panel and keep it separate from the stitches that you cast on for your side borders. This just gives you the freedom to change those side borders if you want, but still know what your pattern multiple for that middle textured panel is. The pattern multiple for that middle textured panel with Lucas is 6 plus 3. So what you want to do is cast on any number that is a multiple of 6 and then add an additional 3 stitches on. And then if you want to replicate the side borders that I have used, you're going to need to add 18 stitches onto that number. That is 9 stitches for either side border. If you want to replicate my blanket exactly, you are going to need to cast on a total of 135 stitches, and that includes your stitches for your side borders. For this video, I am just going to cast on a very small sample, but you can cast on as many or as few stitches as you like. I always like to use the long tail cast on for my blankets, but if you have a cast on method that you prefer, then please go ahead and use that as well. The blanket will still work. This blanket is knitted from bottom to top, so the first part of the blanket that we want to tackle is that bottom garter stitch border. That consists of 15 rows knitted in exactly the same way, so I'm going to walk you through row 1 and then I'll leave you to carry on and work rows 2 to 15 yourself. As the border is garter stitch, every single stitch with the exception of 1 stitch is worked in the same way. This 1 stitch at the end of each row is a selvage stitch, and that is a stitch that is worked slightly differently in order to give you a really nice neat edge up the long edges of your blanket. So to start row 1 of your border, you are going to knit your way across and knit every single stitch until you have just that 1 stitch left to work in your row. To work this very last stitch in the row, you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. So the first part of this process is to get the working yarn to the front of our work, and the way that I do that as a continental knitter is just to lift it with my right hand needle and hold it to the front of my work. But if you knit in a different style and you find it easier just to lift this working yarn to the front of your work, that's absolutely fine too. Then what you want to do is get your right hand needle and you're going to pop it into this final stitch from right through to left, so as if you are going to purl the stitch, and you're going to slide it all the way on to that right hand needle, and once it's firmly on, you can remove the left hand needle. And then the last thing to do is to make sure that this working yarn is at the front of your work, because if you don't do that and you turn your work, you're going to accidentally create an additional stitch and your blanket will get wider every row. So just make sure that this working yarn is all the way to the front of your work. So that is row 1 of 15 done. I will now leave you to carry on and work rows 2 to 15, and then I will rejoin you to show you how to work that middle textured panel that forms the bulk of our blanket. Now that our bottom garter stitch border is done, it's time to move on to the 24 row repeat that forms the bulk of our blanket and builds that middle textured panel. I'm going to walk you through each one of the rows the first time we work them, and then I'll leave you to carry on and work the rest of your blanket yourself, and I'll come back and show you how to work the top edge and then cast off. The first time we work row 1, we're going to do a little bit of setup work just to get our stitch markers in place, but every subsequent time you work your row 1, instead of placing markers, you are just going to slip them. So you're starting row 1 by knitting 9 stitches. Then you're going to grab the first of your 2 stitch markers and just pop it onto your right hand needle. Next you're going to carry on and knit every single stitch until you are 9 stitches before the end of the row, and that will be when you have 9 stitches left to work on your left hand needle. When you reach that point, you're going to grab the second of your 2 stitch markers and again just pop it onto your right hand needle. Then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches, and that should leave you with just 1 stitch left in the row to work. Just like we did with the bottom garter stitch border, for this final stitch we are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 2 by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker, and this is a good point to check that you have placed your stitch markers correctly, and you should be able to knit 9 stitches before you hit that first stitch marker. Slip your stitch marker over and then purl the next 3 stitches. Next you're going to jump into a 6 stitch repeat that you are going to work all the way down your row until you hit this second stitch marker, and that 6 stitch repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 3 stitches and then purl 3 stitches. So that's knit 3, purl 3 all the way along your row until you hit that second marker. And if you have counted your stitches correctly, you should hit that second marker after a purl 3. Slip that second marker over and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. Then finish off your row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 3 by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and then carry on and knit 3 more stitches. Now you're going to jump into a 6 stitch repeat that you're going to repeat all the way across until your second marker, and that 6 stitch repeat goes as follows. You are going to purl 3, and then knit 3. And you're going to repeat that purl 3, knit 3 all the way down your row, and if you count your stitches correctly, you should finish and hit your second marker after a knit 3. Slip your second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. Finish your row by slipping that last stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 4, start by knitting the first 9 stitches, and that should take you to your first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and then purl the next 3 stitches. Then, just like with our other rows, we are going to jump into that 6 stitch repeat that we're going to repeat along our row until we hit the second marker. And for row 4, that repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 3 stitches and then purl 3 stitches, and then you're going to repeat that combination of knit 3, purl 3 all the way along until you hit your second marker, and you should hit your second marker after a purl 3. Slip that second marker over and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. That should leave you with just that final selvage stitch to work, and you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 5 by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and then knit 3 more stitches. Then once again we are going to jump into that 6-stitch repeat that we're going to repeat across until our second marker, and for this row that repeat goes as follows. You are going to purl 3 stitches and then knit 3 stitches, and you're going to repeat that until you hit your second marker, and you should hit that marker after a knit 3. Slip that second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. Last but not least, you're going to slip that last stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 6 by knitting the first 9 stitches. Slip the marker over and then purl the next 3 stitches. Then you're going to jump into the 6-stitch repeat for this row that you're going to work across until you hit your second marker, and for this row that 6-stitch repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 3 and then purl 3, and you're going to repeat that all the way along until you hit that second marker, and you should hit that second marker after a purl 3. Slip your second marker over and then you're going to knit 8 stitches. As always, you're going to slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 7 by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and then knit the next 3 stitches. Now it's time for the 6-stitch repeat for this row. You're going to repeat it over and over until you hit your second marker, and the 6 stitches for this row are purl 3 and then knit 3. And you're going to work that across your row until your second marker, and you should hit that second marker after a knit 3. Slip your second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. Last but not least, slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 8 by knitting those first 9 stitches that take you to your first stitch marker. Slip that first marker over and then purl the next 3 stitches. Then, just like our other rows, we're going to jump into our 6-stitch repeat for this row. You're going to work that down until you hit this second marker, and for this row your repeat is knit 3 and then purl 3. And just like the other rows, you should hit your second stitch marker at the end of a 6-stitch repeat, so in this row that is after a purl 3. Slip that second stitch marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. Finish off by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Rows 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13 are all worked in the same way. So for the next 5 rows, you are just going to work them all in the same way, and then I will rejoin you to show you what to do for row 14. So the way you're going to work the next 5 rows, rows 9 to 13, you are going to knit every single stitch with the exception of that final stitch. When you come to them, you're going to slip your stitch markers over from one needle to the other, and then when you get to that very last stitch of the row, you're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. So all of the next 5 rows, that's rows 9 to 13, are worked in this way. So I'll leave you to carry on with those, and then I will rejoin you for row 14. Row 14 starts by knitting those 9 stitches that make up your side garter stitch border. Then you're going to slip your marker over and knit the next 3 stitches. Next, you're going to jump into the 6 stitch repeat for this row, and for row 14 that 6 stitch repeat goes as follows. You are going to first purl 3 and then knit 3. And you want to repeat that combination of purl 3, knit 3 all the way until you hit your second marker, and you should hit your second marker after a knit 3. Slip your second marker over and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. Finish off your row by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 15 by knitting the first 9 stitches. That should take you to the first marker, and when you get to it you are going to slip it over from one needle to the next. Then you want to purl the next 3 stitches. Then once again we are going to jump into a 6 stitch repeat that you're going to repeat along until you hit your second marker, and for this row this repeat goes as follows. You are going to knit 3 and then purl 3, and you're going to work that knit 3 purl 3 combination all the way along your row until you hit your second marker, and when you get to your second marker you should have just worked a purl 3. Slip that second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. Finish off by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 16 starts by knitting those 9 edge stitches until you hit the first marker. Slip that marker over and then knit the next 3 stitches. Once again you're going to jump into a 6 stitch repeat that you're going to work across until you hit your second marker, and that 6 stitch repeat is as follows. You are going to purl 3 and then knit 3, and you're going to repeat that block of 6 stitches until you hit your second marker, and if you've counted your stitches correctly you should come to your second marker after a knit 3. Slip that second marker over and then you're going to knit the next 8 stitches. For that final stitch, as always, you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 17 by knitting until you hit your first stitch marker. Slip that marker over and then you want to purl the next 3 stitches. Now you're going to jump into a 6 stitch repeat that you're going to work across until you hit your second marker, and the 6 stitches you want to work for this row are knit 3 and then purl 3, and you're going to repeat that along your row, and you should come to your second stitch marker after a purl 3. Slip that second stitch marker over and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. That should leave you with just your final selvage stitch, and you're going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 18 by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip that stitch marker over and then knit 3 more stitches. Then you're going to jump into a 6 stitch repeat, and for this row that goes as follows. You are going to purl 3 and then knit 3. And you're going to repeat that until you hit your second marker, and that should come after a knit 3. Slip that second marker over and then knit the next 8 stitches. Then we're just left with our selvage stitch, and we're going to slip that purlwise with the yarn in front. Row 19, again you're going to start by knitting until you hit that first stitch marker. Slip the marker over and then purl the next 3 stitches. Then you're going to jump into a 6 stitch repeat, and for row 19 you are going to knit 3 and purl 3, and you're going to repeat those 6 stitches all the way until your second marker, and you should come to your second marker after a purl 3. Slip that second marker over and then carry on and knit the next 8 stitches. Then you're going to slip that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Start row 20 by knitting the 9 stitches that take you to that first marker. Slip the marker over and then knit 3 additional stitches. Then once again we're going to jump into a 6 stitch repeat that we're going to repeat over until we hit our second marker, and for row 20 you are going to purl 3 and then knit 3, and you repeat those stitches until you hit that second marker, and you should hit the second marker at the end of a knit 3. Slip your second marker over from your left to your right needle and then knit the next 8 stitches. Finish off by slipping that final stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. Rows 21 to 24 are the last 4 rows of our repeat, and they are worked all in exactly the same way. What we are trying to achieve is to get another 2 garter ridges like we did halfway through the pattern repeat. So for rows 21 all the way and including to 24, you are going to knit all the way along and knit every single stitch in the row with the exception of that final stitch. You're going to slip your stitch markers as you come across them, and then when you get to that very last stitch of the row, don't forget that that's our selvage stitch, so you don't want to knit that stitch, you want to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front, and you are going to repeat that for the next 4 rows. So for rows 21, 22, 23 and then 24. So this is what a finished 24 row repeat looks like, and these repeat rows form the building blocks of your blanket. So you would now go back to row 1 and work rows 1 to 24 again, and so on and so forth as many times as you need to build enough length on your blanket. You want to stop when your blanket is about 8 centimeters shorter than you want your overall length to be. In the case of my blanket that I showed you in the introduction, for an 80 centimeter long blanket, I worked a total of 10 sets of repeats. So after this first repeat, I went back and worked another 9. Once you've done that, you want to work rows 1 to 9 once more before you move on to your top garter stitch border. By working rows 1 to 9 once more, what you get is matching stockinette sections in all 4 corners of your blanket so that your blanket has symmetry top and bottom. I will now go away and work another set of rows 1 to 9 so that I can show you what I mean, and then we will tackle that top garter stitch border together. Your project will be a lot bigger than mine, but this gives you a bit of an idea as to what your work should look like before you are ready to move on to your top garter stitch border. You can see that by working rows 1 to 9 once more before you move on to the border, everything matches top and bottom and then at either edge. So it just makes for a really nice symmetrical project. The top garter stitch border is worked exactly the same as the bottom garter stitch border, and the first row that you work should be a wrong side row. That just means that you have the reverse side of your work facing you as you're knitting. For your top garter stitch border, every stitch with the exception of that last selvage stitch of the row is a knit stitch. So you are just going to knit your way across your row, and then on this very first row of edging, when you get to your stitch marker, you can remove your stitch marker because we don't need to mark our side borders anymore, so you can just get rid of them at the beginning of the border rather than keeping them on until we cast off. Then you're going to carry on and knit your way across the row, and then for that very last stitch, instead of knitting it, you are going to slip it purlwise with the yarn in front. That's row 1 of the border done, and you now want to go away and work rows 2 to 15 yourself. Once you've done that, come back and I will show you how we cast off our project and get it into a finished project, no longer on our needles and not just a work in progress. The last part of any knitting project is your cast off row, and for my blankets I like to use a really nice basic knitted cast off. In this video I'm just going to show you how to work the first few stitches and then leave you to carry on yourself, but I do have a more in-depth video designed for beginners that I will link for you, because if you've never tried this cast off before you might want to take a look at that video before you go ahead and attempt it on a big project like a blanket. Your cast off row starts by knitting 2 stitches. Try not to knit them too tight, because if they're too tight your blanket won't lay flat and will pull in. Once you've knitted 2 stitches, you're going to get your left hand needle and pop it into the first of the 2 stitches that you worked from left through to right. Then you want to pop your finger onto the other stitch just so it doesn't accidentally slip off your needle, and then you're going to lift that first stitch up, over and completely off that right hand needle, and you will have gone from 2 stitches on this right hand needle down to 1. Then you're going to knit 1 more stitch to take you back up to 2 stitches on that right hand needle, and then you're going to repeat that process again of popping your left hand needle into the first stitch that was worked, lifting it up, over and off the right hand needle and going back down to 1 stitch on that right hand needle. And you're going to repeat that process of knitting 1 and lifting 1 all the way along your row until you have no stitches left on your left hand needle and you just have 1 stitch left on your right hand needle. Once you're just left with this 1 final stitch, you can break your yarn. You want to leave yourself a tail that is at least 25 centimeters long so that you have enough left to sew in. And then the last step, just to secure this final stitch, you are going to pull up to make it bigger, and then you can get rid of your knitting needles. We don't need those anymore. Pop your finger and thumb through the loop and grab the tail and pull it all the way through. Then you are going to pull to tighten that very last stitch up, and then once you have sewn in your end you get a really nice neat corner. A couple of final bits and bobs just before I leave you to your knitting. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this blanket is reversible, so the front and the back look pretty much identical. That being said, when you are knitting your project, I count the odd rows as right side rows. So that means when you are working your odd rows, that is when you have the right side of your work facing you, and the way you can tell is that you have 2 rows of garter stitch on the front of the blanket, and then on the opposite side you have 3, but that's really the only difference between the 2 sides. If you are somebody that likes to have written instructions to follow along to, then as always I have a free written pattern on my blog, and then I also have links to an ad-free PDF if you prefer to have something to buy and keep and print out and take away with you rather than looking at a screen. Last but not least, you can knit this blanket in any weight of yarn you like. Just make sure that you adjust your cast on and the number of repeats that you work to account for any extra or fewer stitches. Again, the instructions on how to adjust sizing are also on my blog. All that's left for me to do now is to leave you with another project that might inspire you, but that's all from me for this video for today.